All right, so get ready because today we are going deep into romantic poetry and literary criticism.
Ooh, sounds intense.
It is, but in a good way. We've got Shelley.pds in front of us, which is all about Percy Bysshe Shelley's defense of poetry.
Shelley, huh?
Ah,
I'm intrigued already.
me too. And here's the kicker. He wrote this as a direct response to another writer, Thomas Love Peacock,
Okay.
who basically said that poetry was totally useless in the modern world.
Oh, snap. That's fighting words.
Right. You can practically hear the mic drop coming. So, today we're going to unpack Shelley's arguments, see how he elevates poetry's role in society,
Yeah, let's get into it.
and hopefully leave you with some thought-provoking ideas to ponder.
Sounds like a plan.
So first, let's set the stage. Can you give us a quick rundown of Peacock's argument? Why was he so down on poetry?
Well, Peacock had this idea about the 4 ages of poetry: gold, silver, brass, and iron.
Okay, I'm listening.
And he basically saw poets as these, well, kind of like semi-barbarians, obsessed with useless pursuits. Yeah, he considered his own time, like the 19th century, to be the brass age, the declining era of poetry.
So basically, poetry's best days were behind it, according to Peacock.
Pretty much. He thought it had lost its relevance in the modern industrialized world.
I can see how that would have ticked Shelley off.
Oh, totally. Shelley was this passionate believer in the power of poetry, so to have someone dismiss it like that.
Must have been like a personal attack.
Exactly. It's no wonder he felt compelled to write a whole treatise defending it.
Now, this whole back and forth reminds me of another famous defense of poetry. Have you ever read Sir Philip Sidney's An Apology for Poetry?
Of course, a classic. It's fascinating how both Sidney and Shelley had to come to poetry's rescue centuries apart.
Right, like a literary duel across time.
Totally. And both works are structured similarly, defending poetry's value and definition.
But what sets Shelley's work apart?
Well, Shelley infuses it with these really potent romantic ideals. He digs deep, philosophically, into what makes poetry tick.
Okay, now I'm really curious. How did Shelley even define poetry? Did he stick to the traditional rhyming verses, or did he, blow the whole thing wide open?
Get ready for a mind shift, because Shelley saw poetry as this ultimate expression of imagination, way beyond just traditional verse.
Whoa, hold on. So he's saying there's poetry beyond poems.
Exactly. Think about it. Artists, musicians, even lawmakers can tap into this poetic power, according to Shelley.
Interesting.
He saw rhythmic language, like in poems, as the most refined form, but not the only one. Imagine a world where legal documents could be poetry if they had that imaginative spark.
I'm trying.
A pretty cool concept, right?
It is, but didn't Plato famously want to kick all the poets out of his ideal republic?
He did. Plato viewed them as mere imitators of reality, like thrice removed from the truth.
Unworthy of his perfect society.
Right. But Shelley, he takes this head on and actually uses Plato's philosophy against him.
Okay, how does he pull that off? Because Plato was like the OG philosopher.
Think about Plato's theory of forms, right? Everything we see is just a shadow of a perfect eternal form. Shelley argues that poetry doesn't just imitate, it accesses these divine ideas directly.
So poetry becomes this secret decoder ring for the universe.
In a way, yes. It's a direct line to the source code of truth behind the world's facade.
That's high praise, especially coming from someone debating Plato in the afterlife.
It is. And it's important to remember that Sidney addressed Plato too.
Yeah.
But Sidney focused on, the supposed immorality of Plato's utopian ideas. Shelley goes deeper, tackles Plato's core, and takes poetry to another level.
Okay, my mind is officially blown.
Good.
But let's back up for a second. Even if poetry reveals these big truths, does Shelley think it has any practical use in the real world? Like, can it teach us anything, make us better people?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And here's where we see a big difference between Sidney and Shelley.
I'm all ears.
So, Sidney was all about poetry's ability to teach through examples, making virtue attractive and vice repulsive. Shelley, though, he goes deeper.
Of course he does.
He says poetry's moral power lies in expanding our imagination and emotional capacity. It makes us more empathetic, more understanding.
So it's less about learning specific lessons and more about, growing as a human.
Exactly. Shelley believed that by experiencing strong emotions through poetry, we actually strengthen our moral compass.
It's like working out your empathy muscles.
That's a great way to put it. He also draws on Aristotle's idea of catharsis. The powerful emotions in poetry can cleanse and purify us.
Yeah, we've all had those moments where a song or a poem just hits us right in the feels.
I know exactly what you mean. It evokes something deep inside and shifts our perspective. Like suddenly you see the world differently.
And it's like, whoa, I never thought about it that way before.
Right. And we can't forget Wordsworth's influence here. Remember his idea that poetry reveals beauty and joy in everyday life, making the ordinary feel extraordinary.
Yeah, I love that.
Shelley echoes that idea, suggesting that poetry helps us appreciate the world with fresh eyes.
So we're talking moral growth, emotional intelligence, and a deeper appreciation for the world around us all thanks to poetry.
That's the power of it. But of course, there's also this argument that poetry can be immoral, even dangerous, especially when it deals with love and desire,
Yeah, Sydney acknowledged that poets sometimes wandered into, like, murky territory.
He did. But Shelley takes a much bolder stance. He flat out argues that true poetry is inherently moral and beautiful.
Interesting.
He saw obscenity as the opposite of poetry, a violation of the very essence of life.
So for Shelley, there's a clear line between art and obscenity.
Absolutely. True poetry, no matter how passionate, always seeks beauty and truth, according to Shelley. Now, when it comes to the form of poetry, we see another interesting twist.
I'm ready.
Sidney believed that prose and poetry were fundamentally different.
Right.
But Shelley throws that out the window. He sees no rigid distinction, argues that both can have rhythm and beauty.
He's saying even prose can be poetic.
Yes. Coleridge, for instance, would have totally disagreed. He thought poetic language should be distinct. But Shelley points to writers like Jeremy Taylor and Francis Bacon. He felt their prose actually outshone some poetry.
So for Shelley, it's less about the format and more about capturing that essence of imagination, whatever form it takes.
Exactly. That makes you wonder about Shelley's own literary tastes, right?
I was just thinking that. What kind of stuff was he into?
Well, he was a huge fan of Greek and Italian literature, especially Athenian drama, considered it the most noble form of poetry. He even had this theory that the best drama needs a society with a high degree of nobility. It's a debatable idea for sure.
It's a very interesting idea, though.
Right. Makes you think about the connection between art and society.
It does. Did he have any strong opinions about English literature?
Oh, yeah. He really admired John Milton, though he had some issues with Milton's religious views.
Such as?
Well, Shelley considered Satan to be the true hero of Paradise Lost.
Oh, wow, wait, seriously. Satan as the hero.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It shows a certain complexity in Shelley's thinking. But before we get lost in that rabbit hole,
Okay.
I think it's worth revisiting this key point that runs through all of Shelley's arguments,
Yeah.
that poetry can actually make us better people.
Yeah, that's a powerful idea. It's not just about pretty words on a page.
Right.
It's about how poetry can impact our lives, even change the world around us.
Absolutely. And that's something worth thinking about.
So we're talking about poetry as this, like, force for good, right?
Yeah.
A way to make us more empathetic, more understanding, more connected.
Yeah, exactly. And it goes deeper than just, purging those negative emotions to catharsis.
Right.
It's about really expanding our capacity for empathy. Like by experiencing this whole range of emotions and perspectives through poetry, we become more attuned to the complexities of human experience.
It's like a workout for our empathy muscles, right?
I like that, yeah.
You get to step into someone else's shoes, feel what they feel, see the world through their eyes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Shelley really believed that poetry could help us break free from our own limited viewpoints and, develop a more nuanced understanding of the world.
Mm-hmm. And this brings us back to Shelley's idea that true poetry is inherently moral, right?
Right.
It's not just about pretty language or clever rhymes.
No, it's about striving for something deeper, connecting us to the truth and beauty of life itself.
So it's almost like a way of life, a philosophy.
I think so, yeah. He saw it as a force for good, a way to uplift us and inspire us to live more meaningful lives.
It's like he's saying poetry can help us become more fully human.
I love that. That's a beautiful way to put it. Of course, not everyone's going to see it that way.
Mm.
Some people might say poetry is escapist, that it distracts us from the harsh realities of the world.
That's true. I mean, haven't we all gotten lost in a good book or a song and let our worries kind of fade away?
Of course.
Would Shelley see that as a bad thing, though?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Remember, he believed that poetry reveals this, like hidden beauty and joy in everyday life.
Mm.
So it's not about escaping reality, but rather enhancing it,
Right, helping us to see the world with those fresh eyes.
Yeah, and to appreciate those little wonders we often overlook.
So it's not about denying the difficult stuff, but rather finding those sparks of beauty and meaning even in the midst of it all.
Exactly. And, This ties back to Shelley's view of poetry as a form of imagination. By exercising our imaginations through poetry, we become more capable of envisioning a better world, right? And creating solutions to the problems we face.
So it's not just escapism, it's about using our imaginations to actually create real change in the world.
That's a great way to put it.
Now, let's go back to Shelley's literary taste for a sec.
Okay.
We talked about his love for Greek and Italian literature. What was it about those traditions that really drew him in?
Well, he was hugely influenced by those classical ideals of beauty, harmony, and truth that he found in Greek literature. He saw those works as embodying a kind of perfection that he aspired to in his own writing. And then he was also just captivated by the passion and intensity of Italian poetry, especially Dante and Petrarch.
It's cool how he drew inspiration from such seemingly different sources, right? On the one hand, you have the cool, measured beauty of the Greeks, and then on the other, this fiery, romantic spirit of the Italians.
And yet for Shelley, those qualities weren't mutually exclusive.
Right.
He saw them as complementary,
Yeah.
both essential for a full understanding of poetry.
This reminds me of his idea that there's no fundamental difference between prose and poetry. It's as if he's saying the real measure of art isn't the form it takes, but the spirit that drives it.
Exactly. He wasn't confined by those rigid categories or definitions. He was interested in the essence of things, those underlying principles that connect seemingly disparate ideas and forms.
Which is so in line with his expansive view of poetry as this force that, runs through all of life.
Absolutely. He saw it everywhere.
Now, I'm still kind of stuck on his take on Milton.
Yes.
You said he admired him, but, had some issues with his religious beliefs. Can you break that down a little?
Well, Shelley was a devout atheist, and he found Milton's portrayal of God in Paradise Lost to be, kind of authoritarian, even tyrannical at times.
Oh, okay.
He much preferred the character of Satan, whom he saw as this, rebel fighting against oppression.
So he basically flicked the script on the traditional reading of Paradise Lost.
Pretty much, yeah. And this really speaks to his broader rejection of conventional morality and his embrace of individual freedom and self-expression. For Shelley, true morality wasn't about blindly following rules, but about following your conscience and fighting for what you believe in, even if it means going against the grain.
That's a pretty radical idea, especially back then.
Oh, totally. And it explains why he was so drawn to poetry, this art form that allows for that kind of freedom of expression and exploration.
It gives you space to, really challenge the status quo.
Exactly. For Shelley, poetry was a way to question authority and imagine new possibilities for human existence.
This has been, so eye-opening. Shelley's ideas are just so rich and thought-provoking. He's really made me rethink my own assumptions about what poetry is and what it can do.
I think that's the beauty of a deep dive like this. It allows us to explore these new ideas and engage with different perspectives.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it helps us expand our understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
So, okay, let's bring this back to Shelley's original reason for writing this piece.
Okay.
He was responding to Peacock's claim that poetry was basically useless in the modern world. So how does he ultimately counter that argument?
He doesn't just defend poetry, he elevates it. He argues that poetry isn't some luxury or just a form of entertainment, but rather an essential element of a thriving society.
So he's saying a world without poetry is like a diminished world.
Yes. We need poetry to be fully human, to create a better world. He believes it cultivates empathy, expands our understanding, and inspires us to create a more just and beautiful world.
It's like he's saying, hey, instead of declaring poetry dead, we should be embracing it as this tool for healing and growth.
Exactly. It's the antidote to the very problems that Peacock saw as the downfall of the art form.
It's like he's saying, look, the world might be in a brass age, like you said, but poetry is exactly what we need to pull ourselves out of it.
I love that.
Yeah.
And in a world that often feels so divided and disconnected, I think Shelley's message is more relevant now than ever.
Yeah, it's like he's saying, hey, instead of just, declaring poetry dead, we should be embracing it, using it as this tool for, healing and growth.
Totally. It's a good reminder that art, especially something like poetry, can really be a force for positive change in the world.
Absolutely. And it makes me think about something you said earlier about how Shelley believes that poetry, it's not just stuck on dusty bookshelves, right? It's not confined to, stuffy classrooms.
Oh, definitely not.
It's alive in the world, just waiting to be discovered.
It is. And you know what? That's what makes his definition of poetry as the expression of imagination so powerful.
Yeah.
It like opens up all these possibilities of finding poetry in, I don't know, in music,
Hmm.
in nature, and the way we connect with each other.
So true. It encourages us to see the world through this new lens.
Yes, one that reveals those hidden sparks of poetry everywhere.
I love that. So he's not saying everyone needs to become a poet in the like traditional sense.
No, not at all.
It's more about cultivating that sense of wonder and appreciation for the beauty that's all around us.
Exactly. And this connects back to Shelley's belief in the power of imagination to drive positive change, right?
Hmm.
When we really tap into that creative energy, we become more capable of envisioning a better world and actually working towards it.
It's almost like he's giving us permission to like dream bigger, to see beyond the limitations of what is and imagine what could be.
Yeah, I like that.
But okay, before we wrap things up, I want to touch on something you mentioned earlier about Shelley being such a huge fan of Athenian drama.
Oh, yeah. And considering it the most noble form of poetry, what was it about Athenian drama that, like, really grabbed him?
Well, he saw in those ancient plays a reflection of the human spirit at its most profound and, complex.
Yeah.
Those tragedies, especially, they explored these big themes, fate, free will, love, loss, the whole struggle between good and evil.
Yeah, those are some pretty heavy topics. What made them so appealing to Shelley, though?
He believed that by confronting those universal truths through drama, through those stories, we gain a deeper understanding of ourselves and our place in the world.
That makes sense. And he also had this theory, right, that the best drama requires a society with a high degree of, what was it?
Nobility.
Ability, right? Hold on. Is he saying that a society has to be, like, morally upright to produce great art?
It's a bit more nuanced than that. I think he believed that great drama it arises from a society that grapples with these profound questions of morality and justice.
A society where individuals are really engaged in the search for meaning and purpose.
So it's less about being perfect and more about like striving for something greater, something beyond ourselves.
Yeah, and that seems to be, a recurring theme in Shelley's work, wouldn't you say?
It really does. It's like this thread that runs through all of his ideas.
Hmm.
Okay, well, wow, what a journey this has been. Shelley's ideas are just so rich and like thought-provoking. He's really challenged me to think differently about poetry and its role in the world.
I think that's the beauty of these deep dives.
Yeah.
They allow us to explore these new ideas, engage with these different perspectives,
Yeah.
and really expand our understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
So for you listening out there, what does all this mean for you? If poetry really is about expanding our imaginative capacity, like Shelley argues, how might that affect your own understanding of the world and your place in it? Maybe it's time to, dust off those poetry anthologies, explore the works of Shelley and the other poets we've talked about. Or, hey, maybe even try your hand at writing a few lines yourself.
And remember, you don't have to be a scholar or a literary critic to appreciate the beauty and the power of poetry. Just open your heart and your mind, let the words speak to you. You might be surprised at what you discover.
That's the magic of exploring new ideas, isn't it? You never know where it might lead or what treasures you might find along the way. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Shelley's world, and until next time, keep exploring.